November 13th, 1942. 014, 8 hours. Bridge of the destroyer Amatsukaze, Iron Bottom Sound. Commander Tameichi Hara gripped the bridge railing as star shells burst overhead, illuminating his destroyer in harsh white light. For 20 years, the Imperial Japanese Navy had perfected night combat into an art form. Now, American shells were bracketing his ship before his lookouts could even spot the enemy muzzle flashes. Through the bridge windows, Hara witnessed something that contradicted 2 decades of Japanese naval doctrine. American ships were firing accurately at ranges beyond 10,000 yards in pitch darkness, their shells arriving with mechanical precision. No searchlights betrayed their positions. No star shells preceded their salvos. The USS Helena's radar-directed guns had found Amatsukaze, and when Hara left his searchlights on too long, trying to find his attackers, the American cruiser's 6-inch shells killed 43 of his crew. 3 kilometers away, the battleship Hiei shuddered under concentrated fire from ships her lookouts could not even see. The pride of the Imperial Fleet, veteran of Pearl Harbor, was being systematically destroyed by enemies fighting from beyond visual range. What no Japanese officer yet understood was that they were witnessing the deployment of the SG surface search radar technology that would transform naval warfare and destroy Japan's most crucial tactical advantage in 18 months. The mathematics of defeat were being calculated not in ships lost or territories surrendered, but in the sudden obsolescence of 20 years of training, doctrine, and national strategy built on one fundamental assumption: that the Imperial Japanese Navy owned the night. The Imperial Japanese Navy's mastery of night combat had been cultivated since the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905. At the Battle of Tsushima, Admiral Togo's torpedo boats had devastated the Russian fleet under cover of darkness. This victory became gospel, establishing night combat as the cornerstone of Japanese naval strategy for defeating numerically superior enemies. By 1942, this doctrine had evolved into the most sophisticated night fighting system in the world. Japanese sailors trained relentlessly in darkness. Lookouts underwent specialized programs to enhance their night vision, spending hours in darkened rooms, avoiding vitamin A deficiencies, and practicing distance estimation in low-light conditions. The average Japanese lookout could spot ship silhouettes at 7,000 meters on a moonless night, twice the distance of their American counterparts. The technology gap seemed to confirm Japanese superiority. While America relied on primitive radar sets that most captains distrusted, Japanese optics led the world. Their binoculars, manufactured by Nippon Kogaku, later Nikon, provided exceptional magnification with superior light-gathering capability. Their Type 93 long-lance torpedoes could strike targets at 24,000 yards, far beyond any range at which American ships could detect them at night. The early Pacific War validated every assumption. At the Battle of Savo Island on August 9, 1942, Japanese cruisers annihilated an Allied force in 33 minutes of night combat, sinking 4 heavy cruisers without losing a single ship. At the Battle of Tassafaronga on November 30, 1942, a single Japanese destroyer squadron savaged a superior American cruiser force, torpedoing 4 ships in minutes. Unknown to the Imperial Navy, a revolution in radar technology was occurring in American shipyards and laboratories. The SG surface search radar, developed under the guidance of the MIT Radiation Laboratory and the Naval Research Laboratory, represented a quantum leap from the primitive sets that had failed at Savo Island. Operating on a 10-centimeter wavelength with a power output of 50 kilowatts, the supplied SG radar could detect a destroyer at 15 nautical miles and track it accurately enough for blind firing at 10 miles. The MIT Radiation Laboratory, established in November 1940, had grown to nearly 4,000 employees by 1943. The foundation of their work was the cavity magnetron delivered by the British Tizard mission in September 1940, a device historian James Finney Baxter III called the most valuable cargo ever brought to our shores. This Breakthrough enabled the production of approximately 1,000 SG radar sets during the war. The first Fletcher-class destroyer, USS Fletcher, DD 445, commissioned on June 30, 1942, carried this revolutionary system as standard equipment. By November 1942, Fletcher herself was operating in the Solomon Islands, though she would be the only Fletcher-class destroyer present at the naval battle of Guadalcanal. The Plan Position Indicator (PPI) scope provided a god's-eye view of the battle space, displaying all contacts on a circular screen that updated every 2 seconds. Operators could distinguish between ship types by their radar returns, track torpedo wakes, and even spot periscope depth submarines. The system worked equally well in daylight or darkness, in clear weather or storms, through smoke or fog. The SG radar was fully integrated with the Mark 37 gun director, linked to an analog fire control computer that could calculate firing solutions in seconds, automatically adjusting for target speed, course, wind, and ship motion. The 5-inch 38 caliber guns, standard armament on Fletcher-class destroyers, could fire 15 to 20 rounds per minute with radar-directed accuracy. This meant that, for the first time in naval history, a destroyer could fight blind, yet precise. Where Japanese officers relied on lookouts and optics honed over decades, American crews could now see in darkness and through storms. The stage was set. By late 1942, the radar revolution had arrived in the Pacific. The night of November 12th to 13th, 1942, would begin the shattering of Japanese assumptions. The naval battle of Guadalcanal opened when Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan's task force intercepted Vice Admiral Hiroaki Abe's bombardment group approaching Henderson Field. While only USS Fletcher represented the brand new class of destroyers, several other ships carried SG radar, including USS Helena. At 0124 hours, Helena's SG radar detected Japanese ships at 27,000 yards, far beyond visual range. For the next 20 minutes, American radar operators tracked the approaching Japanese force, while Japanese lookouts strained futilely into the darkness. The battle descended into chaos as American radar-directed fire disrupted Japanese formations before they could employ their superior night-fighting tactics. The destroyer Akatsuki, attempting her specialized night torpedo attack, was caught in radar-directed crossfire from multiple American ships. She exploded and sank in minutes. Commander Hara aboard Amatsukaze experienced the new reality firsthand. His ship torpedoed USS Barton, breaking her in half, and struck USS Juno, leaving her crippled. But when he illuminated USS San Francisco with searchlights to improve gunnery, USS Helena's radar-directed guns immediately found Amatsukaze, inflicting severe damage and heavy casualties. The battleship Hiei, flagship of Admiral Abe, became the focus of American radar-directed fire. In darkness and rain squalls that should have provided concealment, she absorbed 85 shell hits from enemies firing at ranges beyond Japanese visual capability. Her bridge was wrecked, her steering destroyed, her superstructure ablaze. She would be scuttled the next day, the first Japanese battleship lost in the war. The disparity between Japanese and American night fighting capabilities became increasingly apparent through late 1942 and early 1943. By then, the SG radar operating at 3 GHz with 50 kilowatts peak power, detecting destroyers at 15+ nautical miles with a precision of plus or minus 40 yards in range and half a degree in bearing, was proving decisive. Compact at 1,000 pounds and boasting 95% reliability, it was practical for widespread deployment. By contrast, the Japanese Type 22 radar, operating at 150 MHz with only 2 kilowatts of peak power, could barely detect destroyers at 10 nautical miles under ideal conditions. Its range accuracy was 300 yards, its bearing error 5 degrees, and it weighed over 2,000 pounds. Of the first 60 sets built, only about 6 actually worked. By war's end, Japan would produce only about 300 radar units total, less than a third of SG production alone. The Japanese had in fact invented key components of radar doctrine. Hidetsugu Yagi had pioneered the directional antenna in 1926, and Japanese researchers had developed cavity magnetrons by 1937. Yet military leadership excluded Yagi from radar work, and inter-service rivalry left the Army and Navy developing separate, incompatible systems. When Japanese forces captured British radar equipment with Yagi antennas, they failed to realize it was based on a Japanese invention. The consequences became starkly clear. In battles like Vella, October 6–7, 1943, when USS Selfridge tracked long-lance torpedoes by radar and successfully evaded them weapons that had been nearly unstoppable in earlier battles. The Tokyo Express destroyer runs to resupply Guadalcanal once the pride of the Imperial Navy's night combat tactics began to suffer heavy losses as radar-equipped American ships intercepted them in darkness, in storms, in conditions where Japanese crews had always excelled. Even legendary destroyer Captain Raizo Tanaka, who led many of these runs, admitted after the war that the Americans' radar had stripped Japan of its night fighting supremacy. By early 1943, the Americans had fully grasped the implications of radar warfare. Night battles that once played to Japanese strength now unfolded as one-sided contests in which radar-equipped destroyers and cruisers struck first, struck accurately, and often without being seen at all. Battle of Vella Gulf, August 6–7, 1943. Commander Frederick Moosbrugger's 6 destroyers detected 4 Japanese destroyers transporting 950 troops. At 11:33 p.m., the American force closed to optimal torpedo range, unseen in the night. The result was devastating. 3 Japanese destroyers, Hagikaze, Arashi, and Kawakaze, were sunk. Over 1,200 Japanese sailors and soldiers perished. American losses, 0. Not a single hit was scored against U.S. ships. Captain Tameichi Hara, commanding the sole Japanese survivor Shigure, later called it a perfect American victory. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz described Vella Gulf as a little classic of naval warfare, proof of how completely radar had reversed the balance of night combat. Battle of Cape St. George, November 25, 1943. Perhaps the clearest demonstration of radar supremacy came when Captain Arleigh Burke's Destroyer Squadron 23, the Little Beavers, intercepted 5 Japanese destroyers attempting to evacuate troops. At 1:41 a.m., American radar detected the enemy. Burke's ships shadowed them undetected, maneuvering perfectly by radar plot. At 1:55 a.m., the Americans launched torpedoes and opened fire. In the running battle that followed, 3 Japanese destroyers, Onami, Makinami, and Yugiri, were sunk. 647 Japanese sailors were killed. American losses, 0 casualties, 0 damage. Burke's after-action report was chilling in its precision. Entire engagement conducted by radar plot. Visual contact with enemy never achieved nor required. This battle convinced Japanese naval leadership that night surface combat was no longer viable against radar-equipped Americans. It marked the last major surface engagement of the Solomon Islands campaign. The Solomon Islands campaign ends. From mid-1942 through late 1943, the waters around Guadalcanal and the Solomons became the testing ground for radar warfare. August–September 1942, Japanese and American night losses roughly equal. October–November 1942, Japanese losses doubled American. December 1942, January 1943, Japanese losses tripled American. February 1943, onward, Japanese losses catastrophic, American losses minimal. By the end of the campaign, Japan had lost 40 destroyers in 16 months. The Imperial Navy's proud mastery of night combat had been broken, its doctrine shattered, and its best captains left helpless against an enemy they could not even see. The radar revolution was not just a matter of clever inventions, it was the result of industrial scale and scientific organization that Japan could not hope to match. American radar production. By 1944, the United States had built an electronics infrastructure unparalleled in history. 175 Fletcher-class destroyers, launched between 1942 and 1944, each with radar as standard. 1,000 SG radar sets manufactured during the war. 100,000 radar sets of all types produced by war's end. 250,000 cavity magnetrons mass-produced, a component Japan never managed to replicate reliably. 2.5 million radio tubes produced monthly by 1944. 50,000 trained radar technicians. $1.5 billion in 1940s dollars invested in radar development. This meant that radar was not an experimental or rare technology. It was standard equipment, constantly improved, and deployed everywhere from carriers and battleships to destroyers and escorts. Japanese radar production. By contrast, Japan's production effort was minuscule. Only 32 destroyers of all types built between 1942 and 1944. About 300 radar sets total produced for the entire Navy, fewer than the U.S. built, just of the SG model. 50,000 radio tubes monthly at peak capacity, a fraction of American output. 500 partially trained radar technicians, minimal budget allocated to radar development. The disparity was staggering. In key areas, the U.S. advantage was 5-0 to 1 or greater. Technical comparison. SG radar versus Type 22. The numbers tell the story. SG radar U.S. Frequency, 3 GHz, 10 centimeters wavelength. Power output, 50 kilowatts. Range versus Celen. Destroyer, 15 plus nautical miles. Accuracy, plus or minus 40 yards in range, plus or minus 0.5 degrees in bearing. Display, plan position indicator, PPI, showing the whole battle space production. 1,000 units. Type 22 radar. Japan. Frequency, 150 megahertzes, 2 meters. Wavelength. Power output, 2 kilowatts. Range versus Destroyer, 10 nautical miles. Optimal. Accuracy, plus or minus 300 yards in range, plus or minus 5 degrees in bearing. Display, A-scope, only spike on a line, no mapping. Production, 300 units total. The SG was generations ahead. Better frequency resolution, superior range, fully integrated with fire control, and far more reliable. Japanese radars often failed at sea, and officers distrusted them. Many captains reverted to visual spotting, even when their radars were working a fatal disadvantage. Industrial capacity as strategy. Every Fletcher-class destroyer represented more than a warship. It was proof of American industry's ability to convert science into operational power on a scale Japan could never hope to achieve. By war's end, the Imperial Japanese Navy found itself fighting a radar war with obsolete doctrine, inadequate production, and technology it could neither trust nor replicate. The collapse of Japanese night superiority was not sudden. It was a slow but inevitable unraveling that stretched from late 1942 into 1944. Each defeat chipped away not only at Japan's fleet, but at the very foundation of its naval doctrine. Training rendered obsolete. For decades, the Imperial Navy had invested in night vision training schools, where sailors sat in darkened rooms to condition their eyes. Strict diet regimens to prevent vitamin deficiencies that might weaken eyesight. Optical rangefinders and world-class binoculars, manufactured by Nippon Kogaku. The Long Lance torpedo, believed to be the ultimate night weapon. But radar made all of this irrelevant. A U.S. destroyer could track a target hidden by squalls, smoke, or total darkness at ranges far beyond human vision. The skills painstakingly cultivated since Tsushima in 1905 had become useless in less than 2 years. Doctrinal shock. By early 1943, orders from Combined Fleet Headquarters admitted American radar superiority. New doctrines emphasized extreme maneuvering, sacrificing ships in order to get into torpedo range, accepting catastrophic losses as a condition of night attacks. The Tokyo Express resupply runs, once executed with confidence by Japan's finest destroyer captains, became suicide missions. American destroyers intercepted them relentlessly, firing first, striking true, and even pursuing fleeing ships into the night. Psychological erosion morale broke down among sailors who had spent their careers believing they were the masters of night fighting. Radar battles like Vella Gulf, August 1943. 3 Japanese destroyers lost. No U.S. casualties. Cape Street, George, November 1943. 3 more destroyers lost. Again, no U.S. casualties. Reports noted that Japanese crews felt helpless against an enemy they couldn't see. Long-lance torpedoes increasingly struck empty water, launched at radar-tracked ghosts that evaded with ease. Failed. Countermeasures. Japan attempted counter-radar measures, but all failed. Chaff, Gammon, ineffective against U.S. Radar sophistication. Electronic jamming. Japan lacked the electronics industry to mass-produce jammers. Radar reflective paints. Marginal at best. Doctrinal blind-launch torpedo spreads. Accuracy so low they wasted valuable long-lance weapons. By 1944, the Imperial Navy had effectively abandoned night surface combat. Battleships and destroyers that once sought night engagements now avoided them entirely unless desperation forced action. The defeat of the Imperial Japanese Navy's night doctrine was more than a tactical collapse. It represented a philosophical and cultural catastrophe for a force rooted in Bushido and traditional concepts of warrior superiority. The Bushido dilemma: Japanese officers had been raised to believe that spiritual strength and courage could overcome material disadvantage. For decades, this belief was reinforced by victories. Tsushima in 1905, the night battles of the early Pacific War, where optics and torpedoes prevailed. But radar made these qualities meaningless. A destroyer crew's bravery could not help them against shells falling from unseen ships at 10,000 yards. Radar reduced the art of night fighting, once celebrated as a uniquely Japanese strength, to irrelevance. Cultural shocks: invisible enemy. Sailors were trained to fight with their eyes, yet battles now unfolded against targets they could not see. Negated heroism. Acts of individual valor mattered little in engagements fought by radar screens and analog computers. Shattered superiority myths. Japanese propaganda had long painted Americans as soft and spiritually weak, dependent on machines. Yet it was precisely those machines, oscilloscopes, magnetrons, and fire control computers that crushed Japan's warrior navy. Strategic consequences: radar superiority did not simply win battles, it reshaped the Pacific War. Tokyo Express failure. Once Japan's lifeline to Guadalcanal, it became a slaughterhouse. Radar-directed ambushes bled away destroyers Japan could not replace. Submarine vulnerability. Japanese submarines, reliant on surfacing at night to recharge batteries, found themselves detected and hunted by radar-equipped escorts like USS England, which sank 6 submarines in 12 days in May 1944. Carrier protection. Radar-directed destroyers shielded U.S. carriers more effectively than ever, repelling night attacks before they could strike. Strategic retreat. By late 1943, Japanese high command began to avoid night battles altogether, effectively conceding the darkness that once was their greatest ally. Psychological parallels. Japanese officers compared radar to the B-29 Superfortress. Just as bombers struck from altitudes beyond fighter reach, destroyers now struck from ranges beyond visual sight. Both left defenders feeling helpless, watching devastation unfold from unreachable enemies. For sailors who had built their identity on night mastery, this was devastating. Reports spoke of men losing faith, their confidence drained not just by defeat, but by the realization that their training and traditions had been made obsolete by technology. Statistical reversal. The numbers make the transformation undeniable. Pre-radar era, December, 1941, October, 1942. Japanese destroyer losses in night combat, 8 American destroyer losses. 11 exchange ratio. 1.4 to 1 inch. Japan's favor. Early radar era. November 1942. Jun. 1943. Japanese losses. 19. American losses. 7. Exchange ratio. 2.7 to 1 inch. America's favor. Mature radar era. Jewel. 1943. August. 1945. Japanese losses. 47 American losses. 4 exchange ratio. Nearly 12 to 1 inch. America's favor. By 1945, the Imperial Navy that had once dominated the night found itself unable to operate after dark. Personal testimonies. Commander Tameichi Hara, the only Japanese destroyer captain from Pearl Harbor to survive the entire war, wrote in his memoir Japanese Destroyer Captain 1961 that radar had rendered Japanese night training useless. He described watching his carefully trained crews suffer catastrophic losses to an enemy they could never see. Admiral Reizo Tanaka, famed commander of the Tokyo Express, admitted in 1956 that American radar fundamentally changed naval warfare, making Japanese tactics obsolete. Both men agreed Japan had underestimated the speed of technological change and had clung to outdated doctrine far too long. The MIT Radiation Laboratory, the MIT Rad Lab, deserves special recognition. Established in November 1940 under Dr. Lee Dubridge, it grew to nearly 4,000 staff, producing over 100 microwave radar systems and fueling the Allied electronic revolution. 9 of its scientists would go on to win Nobel Prizes. Its foundation lay in the British cavity magnetron, delivered in the Tizard mission of September 1940, which the Americans mass-produced in numbers Japan could not comprehend. This single piece of technology transformed night combat forever. Cultural reckoning. For the Imperial Navy, the radar war shattered deeply rooted beliefs that courage and training could overcome material disadvantage, that superior optics and torpedoes guaranteed mastery of the night, that Americans were too dependent on machines to fight effectively. Instead, Japan discovered that in modern war, technology is not supplementary, it is supreme. Those who see first win. Those who see farthest dominate. Final legacy. By war's end, of the 70 modern destroyers Japan possessed at Pearl Harbor, only a dozen remained. Radar had turned Japan's greatest strength into its greatest liability. The Fletcher-class destroyers, with their SG radar, had not only defeated Japan's destroyer force, they had ended the age of visual naval combat. The Pacific had become the proving ground for electronic warfare. The darkness, once Japan's ally, became its tomb. American radar turned the night into a battlefield where courage and skill no longer mattered, only who could see the unseen. The revolution was absolute, devastating, and irreversible. The Imperial Japanese Navy masters of the night, since Tsushima ended the war blind in the darkness they once ruled.